Um,
Yeah, so yeah, like usual, welcome to the SIGCHI Colombo Invited Talk series. Actually, last two series we had Brian from Philippines, and we also had uh, uh, from IIT Mumbai, Richa Mishra, and then this time. Yeah, this time, this time I'm so happy that Kushani from ours. I mean, this is the first series that we have one of Sri Lankan coming to the series. So really welcome you, and then I'm really excited to hear what you want to share. Kushani, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshi. I'm really happy to be here. It's so lovely to um, be back with UCSC, even if it's briefly. So as Dr. Lakshi has requested, I'll talk a little bit about my approach to research and how I conduct and start my research, roughly what the process is, and what my experience at Kai this year was. And firstly, thank you, Dr. Deoksha, for inviting me. So I'll get this underway. Hopefully, you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Lovely. So I'm Kushani Perera. I'm from the University of Otago. Um, I just graduated, finishing my PhD last weekend. So, um, thank you. Um, so I'll just go through what my journey was like and how it was working on a niche sector for 3 continuous years was. But I'll start off with a little bit of background about myself and start off with the fact that I'm from UCSC. I did my undergrads in information science, graduating with the 4-year degree in 2021. After which I continued to be at UCSC for another year, working as an assistant lecturer, um, teaching a few courses for the undergraduate degree as well as the BIT course. Um, uh, Immediately after that, I started my PhD late 2022 at the University of Otago, the HCI group, where I joined the HCI group, which mostly works in immersive technologies and different HCI applications of immersive technologies and extended reality. So that's how I fit into the HCI lab here as well. Um, so currently, I'm working as a researcher for the Hey Karapitiperinga Mariko project at the HCI lab, where we're exploring the importance of co-presence, ethical implications, social implications, as well as cultural presence. Um, these concepts of presence is very well explored in terms of virtual reality. And what we're looking into currently is the importance of these concepts when it comes to welcoming guests into virtual spaces, especially in the context of tourism, because based in the context of New Zealand and the Maori culture, welcoming somebody into a space is an important aspect of visiting a space or place. So we're trying to replicate that in a virtual environment so that that experience of welcoming somebody and making a guest feel welcomed in a space carries over into virtual tours. And this is a long 8-year project. As if I'm not wrong, it's about an 8-year project that's ongoing. It's been going on for a little bit now. What we're currently working on is trying to polish up the technology because we're working on getting volumetric representations or voxelized representations of owners of different spaces welcoming them, welcoming guests into these spaces by way of appropriate cultural and social procedures. That's me. Now I'll go right into what the talk today is about. So what we're talking about first is what roughly the research process is that we follow at HCI lab. So there we go. So what the rough process that we follow at HCI lab is we do a rough literature review in our area where we look into what kind of research gaps exist and what kind of motivations or what's novel at the moment and what's oftentimes, at least in my case, it was about what's trendy and what people are gravitating more towards. And identifying the research gap is a way of literature reviews. A literature review is tedious, but it's part of the research process that is quite integral and rewarding in the end. In the beginning, it can be seen as a little tedious and exhaustive, but that is how research work, at least for us, starts. Then we narrow those down to actually identify dimensions of interest, because it's important to narrow down truly interesting aspects of a specific context and find out what really is interesting about the thing that you've found in the literature reviews, because sometimes you have way too many ideas. This is a problem that I had constantly throughout my PhD. I had way too many ideas, way too many things that I thought was interesting and I wanted to explore, but they needed to naturally be severely narrowed down. For example, this was a snapshot of me coming up with dimensions to explore for one of my studies, where I looked at face recognition technology with pervasive augmented reality. So especially when you're doing a PhD, you spend quite a bit of time focusing on a specific context and specific technology. And that's all you think about, even while you're doing your menial tasks of going about your day or cooking or cleaning. You're still thinking about things that you can explore and how people might perceive things in your area. And then you see everything as interesting and as worth being explored. But then you end up coming up with like 17 different options of what you want to look into in terms of a specific technology. But to really conduct good research with clarity, where the readers can understand what you're talking about, and most importantly, to get to convey the idea that you want to convey, you need to pick specific dimensions to study. You can't clutter a single study or a single publication with multiple dimensions of interest, because that just muddies the waters and kind of diverts your attention from what you're trying to say. So the more things you try to introduce into your studies, the more confounds you accidentally compile in your own work, such as participants being fatigued, because when you're studying too many things, you have to test too many things. And this is something I learned through experience, that we have to be really careful about in terms of managing resources and managing participants, as well as maintaining clarity in what we're looking into. So going back to the process, once we have our dimensions of interest, then the point is to find out what's measurable. And this is usually done with developing hypotheses. But my work, however, is predominantly qualitative, where for me, research questions are more suited because it allows you to explore nuances more broadly than hypotheses do. With hypotheses, what we do is we look at what's measurable, and in terms of your dimensions of interest and identifying what's the independent variables are, what the dependent variables are, what causes which effects. And this is more suitable when you're conducting quantitative research, coming up with hypotheses. But for me, as I said before, I my work is qualitative, my work is in ethics, so it's really based on how participants and humans interact and perceive things. So for me, it was research questions, and then we move on to operationalizing the variables, which is finding the right tools to measure the right things that you want to measure. So when I'm guessing if there's anyone who's conducting their fourth year research, they've probably picked questionnaires. Often enough, it's questionnaires like the technology acceptance model or the system usability scale. These are good validated measurements and tools that you can use to really measure what you're interested in, and that is what we call operationalizing. After which we quickly move on to developing a prototype, or in my work, we call um, a technology probe. So what I do is I develop a technology probe that is convincing enough, but is not as complex as an actual prototype that would be functional or should be able to be commercialized. Um, my work is with technology probes where it's convincing enough for the participants to actually get an idea of what the real technology would look like in the future, so that they can um, talk about the experience through having lived through or having seen the technology probe be functional during the study. So once we have the technology probe, it's important to do constant testing. And again, one of the many things that I thought was really useful during this process was pilot testing. With especially if you have a lab, that's really easy. You can always use your lab mates as your guinea pigs, have them run through the study, have them run through the procedure, because that way you're making sure that you're not, when it comes the time to actually run the study, you're not wasting your participants' time because that's one thing that's very important. A lot of people put a lot of time and effort into running studies, and it's important to respect that the effort that participants put in. So it's best to iron out any kinks in your experimental design by doing pilot testings first. And usually through these pilot tests, we figure out which part of the design doesn't work, which part of the technology probe is not convincing enough. Um, yeah, but so with that, we come to the designing of the study, where we talk about what kind of participants we want, what kind of a population we're sampling from, and what the procedure is, and how we intend to analyze the data we eventually collect. And then finally, it's time to run the study, which is, well, after a few pilot tests, should be pretty straightforward if everything goes your way. And once you have concluded the study, we do our data analysis. In my case, it was mostly thematic analyses. And then it's about putting it down on paper and really doing the writing and making sure that you get the idea across. And at least for me, the writing of the paper was done quite simultaneously with the rest of the process. It was never done completely at the end stage of having concluded the study and stuff. It was something that I did consistently throughout the entire process, especially because when you're writing a thesis as well as papers, it's important to gather as much information as possible, as fast as possible. So it was important to have all that information gathered together from the get-go. Anyway,
Yes. Maybe I'll ask like questions
of
as
course,
well so that it's easy to process for future students. I see
yes,
two
absolutely.
students also online now. So you said you are primarily looking at qualitative studies, which is in my
Yes,
lab use a mixed method, but mostly quantitative. Now, when you do a specific study, say for example, a pilot one, so is it like mostly observational studies, or do you call it field studies and give a certain amount of days that how people use the VR, or the people need to really come to a physical location and then do it?
yeah. So for me, I didn't do a lot of longitudinal studies. My my studies were empirical. Usually, participants came to the location. They were either in the wild studies where it would be at a cafe or a different part of uh, a semi-public environment, or even at the lab in some cases. But my data came from mainly interviews, semi-structured interviews.
Okay, so yeah, so then you have like a large chunk of data so that
Yes,
you can easily thematize based on the answers, right?
yes,
Yes, it makes
yeah.
sense. Yes.
As you're running studies, you when you're doing the interviews itself, you kind of see when your data gets saturated.
Mm.
You notice after like a few sessions that the comments and the uh, things that people mention start to become a little saturated. You realize there are more repetitions. So I think that's one of the nice things with um, qualitative studies is you already would have an insight into what's coming out of your study while you're still running the study, whereas with quantitative, you might need to iteratively analyze it as you go to see how well your study might be doing. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
no, that's okay. And one of the really effective and helpful processes that I followed when I got here to University of Otago was the ethics approval process, which has recently become more and more of an important aspect when you're publishing papers. Um, so here at Otago, any research that involves human participants would require a thorough ethics approval from the University of Otago Ethics Committee, and it is the researchers' uh, responsibility to ensure that participants are uh, taken care of well, ethically, and responsibly, and we treat them as such. And that's what the ethics committee and the ethics approval does. And recently, I've noticed that more and more venues ask you for your ethics approval number,
Yeah.
and even if
Hi,
you
it's
don't
very
have one.
specific. Yeah, they drill you for ethics application, and in Europe, I think they have ethics reviewers specifically
Yeah.
that you have to upload. And also, like how long is the process? So UCSC also has a fairly good process, and it doesn't take much time, usually 3 months or less than that. But it at a fee. That's the first time that I'm hearing. But at a fee in
Oh,
the
okay.
sense like, yeah. So for UCSC students, it's free in the sense if the project is based in UCSC for the third year
Okay.
MSc. But let's say if a external researcher, which or like a researcher that I'm doing, even though I'm affiliated with UCSC, if my research is
Yeah.
with the collaboration with other universities, then I have to pay.
Oh, I see.
Yes. How's your process?
So our process is, so we have a few stages because University of Otago is we do a lot of medical research here. So we of course have the Health and Disability Ethics Committee, which takes quite long. It's a national level of an ethics application, and even in our lab, we've only had one instance where we've had to apply for that. This was for um, a virtual reality stroke rehabilitation system where the participants had to have a pre-existing condition to be recruited for the study. For cases such as those, we need the ethics approval from the Ministry of Health, which takes quite a while. However, within the university, if it's smaller studies with non-intrusive treatments, non-intrusive methods, if it's health and you're doing like EEGs or ECGs, especially more common with like the psychology department or the physiotherapy department, these don't take as long. They either take, we go through the cycle of the main ethics committee where it takes a month. They meet every month. So we have a deadline, we submit, and they get reviewed on a specific date every month. The ethics committee meets every month. But for simpler studies where there are no deception, there are no recruitment of participants with recruitment of niche participants, where there aren't that many complications, we have department-wide ethics application. So that gets approved more or less a week. Yeah. So for I think 70% of my studies, we had to go to the ethics committee where it was the monthly reviews, because again, I work with people and I work with technology probes in actual public settings. So in that case, we do have to apply for wider ethics, but the turnaround is quick enough, and it is actually we don't have to pay anything as long as the principal investigator is from the University of Otago. Yeah. So what we go through with the ethics application is, I found it to be very helpful when you're designing studies, because it already gives you a structure of really clearing out what you want to study, what your study is about, and what your different aspects are, who your participants are, what a study design is. And most importantly, for our ethics application, every time we do it, we look at the New Zealand Privacy Act and see how we're doing within the constraints of that, and any ethical issues that arise with our study. So that already lets you put in paper a lot of the things about your study that you would otherwise need to clear out over a course of few months. So I think the ethics approval or the ethics application process for me has been very helpful, because that already kickstarts a lot of things. At least when I was at UCSC, when I was doing my fourth year undergrad work, we did not have an ethics process back then. But I think it's very important that has become a standardized process now. At least it might have been because when I conducted our studies, we had to do it during COVID.
Yeah, that complicates the situation, right? Like,
You did.
okay,
So that,
it's good
yeah,
now.
go ahead.
Everything is like very, methodical, have a framework, very,
Yeah.
students, and then there's a website and students can, actually most of the fourth years, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rashmi here would have also got the ethics review. She was a fourth year at UCSC. So even now the time is for proposal defense of the students. So now they're in a midst of thinking how to draft the
Yes.
ethics form, so that they have to jot down every research question and why they need people and stuff
Yes.
like that. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
No, I think it's a very important process. It lets the researchers really think about what they're doing and how they're doing it. It again, as important as doing a pilot test is, it's just as important to iron out those details as early as possible. And I think the ethics application is one of those really well structured places to see how your research looks on paper. So my introduction into research was my fourth year research that I did at UCSC. with some of my batchmates, Akila Gamage, who's also doing a PhD at the University of Canterbury, and Hadi Java here, who's in the industry now, with our supervisors, Professor Kapila Das, who was very helpful with research and even getting it published, and with getting us to present at the conference, and also Dr. Sandharuan, who was our co-supervisor. In this study, we looked at how augmented reality could be used to help people with acute stress. So in this study, we conducted a study with participants, although sadly on Zoom, because as I said, it was during COVID and the process was a little bit more different, where we used a little phone-based application to assess what kind of stress the participant had. If it was psychological, we administered a mindfulness meditation-based intervention through augmented reality, and based on attention restoration theory. And if the stress was categorized as physiological, we administered a progressive muscle relaxation based augmented reality intervention for the user. And that's when I got really interested in augmented reality. And it was during the literature review for this study that I actually found one of my co-supervisors for my PhD that I later got in touch with, and started my PhD here. So this really was the thing that set everything off, the catalyst, really.
Yeah, I think that was the same for me too. Most of those living citations have been my co-authors of the next project most of the time.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so yeah, that's just inspiration for the people who will see this later, or as also people who are here now.
Yeah. And I think if for students who are pursuing a PhD, it's quite important to do your fourth year research as well as you can and get it published at a good venue, so that you already would have something to show your merit and how well you work when you're applying for PhDs. Because a lot of the times I moved on from an undergrad to a PhD directly, so then I didn't have a lot of time to rack up my publications. In fact, all I had was this publication, and luckily it was I thought it was well done. It continues to be one of my favorite publications to date. All right, so now I'll quickly get into what I did in the past few years in terms of my PhD research. So I worked in ethical implications of pervasive augmented reality. So pervasive augmented reality is a little bit different from traditional augmented reality that I explored in my undergraduate research, whereas traditional augmented reality is sporadically used, single purpose, task-driven applications such as using augmented reality on your phone to play Pokemon Go, or using it to visualize IKEA furniture in your living room. Pervasive AR, on the other hand, is more continuous, multi-purpose, and these systems are always on. This is what the new trend is trying to be. The new trend is going towards as well, with the Meta Ray-Ban glasses as well as the Apple Vision Pros. These glasses are becoming more and more inconspicuous. And the most important thing about pervasive AR is these systems are aware of and are responsive to users' context. And by being context aware, these systems deliver the most relevant information to each user in a timely manner. So what we were interested in looking into was what the influence of such a ubiquitous technology would be on its users, as well as the bystanders that are affected by these systems. So as I said before, my work have been predominantly qualitative, where my findings come from inductive thematic analyses. So qualitative analysis is an extremely well-established methodology, and we refer to the highly cited work by Braun and Clark as well as D.R. Thomas to do our analysis. These are often used in sociology and psychology, but is increasingly more popular in the computer science sector as well. And if you look at a lot of the CHI publications, you see often there's a very good representation of thematic analysis. And we even had few sessions purely on thematic analysis this year at CHI.
I think that's one of the great point, Kushani, because we come most of the UCSC plus, let's take Sri Lanka as a case study. Many of them come from computer science background, so the interdisciplinary theories, or whether how to think from that point of on, like for example, sociology, ethnography, or anthropology. These are all new to us. And how did you pick up like the reading, or like is it when you move out there, or like did you when you're reading your extended articles, for example, like looking at the citations, have you got the knowledge and then actively seek? How is it from Otago HCI unit?
So luckily for me, my supervisor, Professor Holger Regenbrecht, had already done a few thematic analyses, and one of my co-supervisors, Dr. Nadia Pantidi from the Victoria University, has a sociology background. So that was quite helpful. So I was immediately directed in the right direction. Like, these are the things you I think it's a case at most universities. When you're doing a PhD, you're allowed to take undergraduate courses free of charge. And one of such courses that I took up was a sociology course to see how qualitative research is done, and that was also very helpful because they followed. Because especially with sociology courses, they go like in depth about this methodology, and they go through the process of Braun and Clark in depth and in detail, and that was quite helpful as well. So yeah, this was us actually doing one of the thematic analyses for one of my studies. These are two of my. This is Professor Holger Regenbrecht and Dr. Nadia Pankivi doing analysis by hand, because also I have tried the tools, the NVivo tools, and for thematic analysis, and what I've realized is they seem a little shallow, because what they're doing is that finding frequencies in terms that emerge quite often. But if you do analysis like that, you kind of lose the nuances that a researcher brings in. This is a very subjective process, and even in the process itself, you always take up responsibility for how your perception and your perspective of how you see things. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this methodology. So this is us iteratively going through the things our participants mentioned, the codes that we generated, to see what patterns we can develop, and if we agree that we didn't agree. This entire process takes about, I think, in one session it takes about 6 hours. It's a long process, but it's a process that I personally enjoy. It's quite a lot of discussions, and it's very interesting to see how different people interpret different things that participants have said. So it's a pretty hands-on process, but I really recommend it to people who are looking into aspects such as ethics, because you can't do those things quantitatively, unfortunately, because you have to look at how people perceive different things, and often with questionnaires that kind of limits participants' responses into very specific boxes, and that doesn't work for ethics and morals of exploring ethics and morals of users. So talking about ethics and morals of users, um, what we looked at was moral intuitions, where what users believed was right and wrong, as well as explicit morality, where these moral intuitions are explicitly stated for different communities and societies and cultures to be followed explicitly. So um, we did not um, follow any detailed philosophical account of ethics because that we believe that would limit the value of our findings. What we were interested in was the likely consequences of using pervasive AR and how that would affect individuals and collectives, um, or the obligations that people would object to and see as problematic, unjust, or difficult to justify with pervasive AR systems.
Just,
Um,
just
yeah,
a quick question.
of course.
Moral, I think moral intuition, we also kind of, look from the computational social science point of view,
Mhm.
where we kind of, analyze the discussions, whether are they morally, uh,
Yeah,
what's their
sound.
inclusion, and then we use a framework from Jonathan Haidt of like five, care, harm, and then
Yeah.
sanity, and there's like five frameworks dimensions they are looking at. And is it in your study also you use the same one, or it's just different?
We use Bernstein's ethical framework for emerging technologies because that framework was developed quite iteratively for, I think, 8 emerging technologies. And one of those was augmented reality. So they've looked at these 8, they've narrowed down their research into 8 um, emerging technologies at the time, and one of them, fortunately, was augmented
Oh,
reality, and they have looked at it in that
right. So
context as
it's very niche to the context, which is give
yes,
you nuance inside. Yeah.
yes. I think if students are looking into ethics, they should probably look at that framework as well because it talks about AI as well as a lot of other technologies, but it's a very concise list of technologies that they look at. Um, So I'll now quickly go through the studies that I've done because I think I'm running out of time. So one of the first studies that I did was about how receiving tailored information via pervasive AR enhanced public displays in otherwise shared settings would affect participants' social interactions and their trust among each other and their social dynamic, and how that would change their social dynamic, affecting the social acceptability of pervasive AI systems, as well as what the design recommendations should be to make these systems more socially acceptable. So this study was designed based on existing research on interactive displays and using social media as inspiration for how content is already tailored to its users. So while a user's interactions with a traditional interactive display is usually clear from the user engaging with that display by getting close to the display and the display, then transitioning into a personal display from an ambient display, this relationship was a little bit more ambiguous when it was done through pervasive AR because everyone's wearing glasses. You can't really see what they're seeing anymore. And for this study, we had 40 participants in pairs in a semi-public environment, and participants used a snap spectacle-based technology probe where they saw content change depending on the condition they were in. And with this study, what we identified was that receiving tailored information in an otherwise shared environment leads to users being isolated from one another due to a lack of common ground. And it also created a sense of privilege, leading to marginalizing those without access to the information that one person is seeing and the others are not, but also marginalizing users based on their access to the device itself. We also saw in terms of trust that users had a sense of distrust among one another because of the information asymmetry, because everyone was seeing a different thing that was tailored to them and they couldn't share it with anyone else. But it also created a sense of distrust in the information itself because, again, they can't verify what they're seeing with another person. And in terms of our third question about the effect these systems would have on social acceptability, like with more studies, um, sometimes you don't have enough evidence to conclusively say if it affected social acceptability or not. So in our case, we concluded that we needed more investigation to actually comment on it. But in terms of design recommendations, we identified that addressing asymmetry and establishing informed consent in these systems would be the best point of action when implementing these systems. So this paper was published at AusCHI, the Australasian CHI conference in 2024. For I think the AusCHI community is a very friendly, very welcoming community, especially for new researchers. It's a very collaborative community. So if students are interested, I think it would be a nice uh, place to start with conferences. It's not overwhelming, it's not intense. And I believe next year, no, this year it's happening in Adelaide. I believe in June. So moving on to my next few studies, what I looked into in my next few studies was using pervasive AR with a live face recognition. So how I came to this dimension of interest was on a comment was on based on a comment that one of my previous participants had made from our previous study, and I just ran with it. Um, However, live face recognition with augmented reality has already been explored in several contexts, such as to help users with prosopagnosia, which is a neurological inability to recognize faces, and also to just help humans uh, to help improve human memory. They've looked into live face recognition with augmented reality, but also it came from the accelerated integration of face recognition technology in new um, upcoming AR glasses, such as Meta announcing the pairing of face recognition technology with their new glasses. If you've seen the new articles that have come out, uh, they're going ahead with the feature that they're calling name tag, where there's been a coalition letter signed by 30 different communities against this feature coming out because um, it's a privacy violation. Um, and moreover, developers increasingly incorporate currently available face recognition services with Meta Ray-Ban glasses, thus exposing unassuming bystanders to face recognition and receiving all the available information about them from the internet. So, sorry. um, so this is one of the contexts that I looked into more thoroughly. And the first time I looked into it was through a lab-based study where I looked at how the symmetry of tailored face recognition-based information would affect users' first impressions, their sense of control, and what the ethical implications of such a implementation would be. This study was designed based on how users present themselves differently in different social contexts as well as on different social media platforms. So, for example, the way I present myself on Instagram would not be the same way I present myself on LinkedIn. So, we had 50 participants in this study in two pairs. And as I said, this was a lab study. That's one of my lab mates who was kind enough to be in all these pictures. That's what the technology probe looked like through the glasses. We again used the Snap spectacle based technology probe for this study. Um, so we had three conditions where we looked at a few things. The first condition was called the symmetric aware condition, where each participant only saw the lowest level of information that they had agreed to show to a person that they were meeting for the first time. And in this case, both parties were aware of the symmetry of the exchange as well as how much information the other person was seeing. But in terms of the next two conditions, the amount of information each participant saw depended on how much they said that they wanted to see before the study about a person they're meeting for the first time. Sometimes people said they only wanted to know somebody's name. Others said that they wanted to know their job and their name. And some people said they wanted to know a lot more than that. So in such cases, it created an asymmetry. And in one condition, participants were aware of such asymmetry and how much information the other party was seeing. But in the final condition, there was no awareness, although the exchange itself was, in fact, asymmetric. So what we found out with this study, based on Stahl's ethical framework for emerging technologies, was that this will create social and ethical consequences to individuals, affecting their autonomy, because now first impressions were being solely based on the information they're seeing as opposed to the interactions they're having, because the information preceded the actual interactions. And even symmetry of the exchange was influential in the first impressions, because participants began to see those who requested more information in first meetings as distrustful. And in terms of control, it shifted the control from the users to the system, as users were now not basing their impressions on their social interactions, but was basing it on the system itself, as well as it created a power imbalance in interactions where one person had more information and could lead a conversation more than the other person could, as well as users' sense of sharing and consuming information. Because again, with pervasive AR, often the interventions, it's triggered by users' context, but it's not triggered by explicit user interventions. So there were ethical consequences to individuals affecting their autonomy, their sense of identity, security from being surveilled all the time, as well as their privacy, and different implications to society as a whole, where this information inequity-based disparities worsened the digital divide that the system already created, as well as different other ethical implications that could arise from shortcomings of the technology itself, like data being inaccurately presented to one another and thereby representing a user inaccurately. So this study was published at ISMA last year. And yep, so if anyone wants to read more, you can do so. But one of the limitations of that study was it was a lab-based study. So we really wanted to look into it, further explore face recognition with pervasive AR systems in an ecologically valid setting, moving from a lab environment, and in our case, to a real public cafe with actual cafe goers present. And also we wanted to look at the influence these systems would have on non-users, in addition to the effect it had on users of these systems. And despite of the findings from the last study, where participants themselves submitted the information to be shown to their other partners during the experience, we wanted to use real scraped information and functional face recognition, because participants in the previous study had a false sense of security, as they, again, had submitted the information to be shown about them to others. So in this study, we looked at purely the social and ethical implications of pervasive face recognition in social interactions, with a keen focus on the implications of role-based exchange of such information and the exchange of scraped information. By scraped information, I mean information that's scraped from the internet about a particular person. So this study was designed based on the tier-based access systems of existing face recognition systems such as PMIs, social catfish, face check ID, all systems where you can put someone's picture up and see what exists on the internet about them. So for this study, we had 54 participants, and each session we had 6 participants in 3 different roles. Some were paying users, where they had the ability to curate what others saw about them, but also had the ability to see information about everyone in the environment. Then we had free users who couldn't curate their own presentation and could only see information about other glass wearers. And we also had, finally, our non-users. In addition to these 3 participant roles, we also had actors and other registered bystanders, such as cafe staff who got recognized through the glasses to simulate a near real scenario of pervasive face recognition. And participants used brilliant frame-based technology probe with functional face recognition during this study. So quickly wrapping up, what we found out from this study was that this role-based access to information leads to asymmetries, and it exacerbated already existing socioeconomic divides, because now it brings into question a little financial component. Like people who has more financial means had more control over their presentation as well as over the information that they received from the people around them. And what we saw was oftentimes where free users could only see information about other glass wearers, they tended to completely ignore non-glass wearing users in the environment and gravitated only towards glass wearers. But then again, users themselves were sort of ostracized too, because they were being seen as stalkers and they were being seen as intrusive. And we could see clear altered social interactions, especially in the way they initiated conversations, because they went directly to people they haven't ever met before and started conversations based on the information they've seen. They often wouldn't even start with a hello or offer any information about themselves or even introduce themselves. They would just go in and say, "Oh, I see that you've done that. So how was that?" Which is not the natural or the usual way of interacting that we are used to. So there were concerns about users in paid roles using this privileged access to curate their own presentation to mislead and manipulate others in the environment as well. And another interesting thing we found was that even though scraped information was publicly available, it's already out there, anyone can look it up, the instant and the unprompted delivery of personal information was a privacy violation, because it creates a profile of a person that was now being delivered quite instantaneously. So the lack of informed consent and the control over self-presentation was rather concerning, because the scraped information that people see about you is often not the information that you want to tell a person that you're meeting for the first time. It can often be outdated or inaccurate altogether. So that brings me to wrapping up what I've learned about pervasive AR and ethics. So what we found out to be the most pressing issue with pervasive AR systems was the asymmetry, because the information inequity worsens the effects of digital divides, creating a power imbalance and even leading to marginalizing different user groups and non-user groups. And the second thing that needs to be addressed with future designs is the unpromptedness, because these systems work without requiring explicit user interventions or often not seeking consent from its users and the bystanders. And the third most important thing was the inconspicuousness, because one of the key differences between traditional augmented reality and pervasive AR is when deployed with a handheld device, like a mobile device, when you hold it up, using AR, there's an inherent indication to users, bystanders, of the operation of the system, where then they can consent or not. But with these new glasses, they're becoming more and more inconspicuous. They look like regular glasses. You no longer know when it's operational or when someone's using these glasses. So that creates a distrust from being seen as intrusive for users, and also affects users' self perception due to the way that they are viewed by others. And it also creates an important shift in how we operationalize consent in our work. So in terms of future work, I think the next step in shaping pervasive AR is to use our findings as a starting point to design future pervasive AR systems.
This in more detail in an upcoming publication, where we discuss the importance of participatory design for future pervasive AR systems with communities through digital civics grounded in our findings from the studies that we've done in the past few years. So now I'll give you a little bit of insight because Dr. Tharushika has asked me to talk a little bit about how Kai was. So that last study was what I presented at Kai with in the ethics everyday ethics session. I think this year Kai was one of the biggest, the most attended Kai conferences so far, and you could see it, you could actually feel it. There was an overwhelming amount of people there, but that also meant it was a really good place to network. A lot of the people that you've cited before, if not all of them, were in fact there. So I think for academics, it's kind of our version of meeting celebrities. Um, and I think even for new students, it's a really good place to build your network and to find new collaborators with. And that's what I've been doing since coming back from Kai. I've been emailing and talking to people, keeping these contacts going and trying to work on new things. And it's very exciting, especially at a conference like this, because the work you see at Kai is also very novel. It's very cutting edge, and it's very inspiring. You often come out of a session with new ideas of new things you can look into. And also, one of the things I liked a lot was that the new format lets students go to the workshops, because the workshops are now on the same days as the paper sessions, and you no longer have to, I think, pay extra for the
Yes.
workshops.
Last time it was 250 per workshop, not this year, last year. So this
Yeah.
year it was like super cool, and really like the format. Morning the papers, evening like you can take part of any other things that you will not miss at all.
Yes, that's so true because uh, every other conference I've been to, the workshops have been on the first few days, and we don't often sign up to those. We only go in for the conference, and it was really very interesting to see what those initial stages of different studies and research that other people are working on. It's really exciting to give them insights and see how it develops in that little 2 hour session. And I think workshops, I think everyone should go to a few workshops every conference. It's a very stimulating place to be. And I also thought I took a picture of this because this was very exciting to see. There was a very big Asian representation at Kai this year, and I was really excited to meet a lot of students from Sri Lanka, and that's how I knew Dr. Dilrukshi was at the conference as well. Meet Dr. Dilrukshi at the conference itself, but then I messaged her because
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine how large is the conference that we didn't meet each other, right? Like
No,
um,
we
it's
didn't
all
even cross paths, I don't think.
exactly. So because 5,000 people.
I felt like most of Barcelona was people from Kai, and I would meet people at museums and cafes. And like, oh, you're at the conference. Oh, I'm at the conference too. But it was a
Yeah.
very cool experience. It was a lot of like-minded people coming together, and um, it can be overwhelming if it's your first conference, um, but it's a very inspiring place to be. So there's a lot of really, really good work being done, good work being discussed, and it's a nice discussion to be part of. So a few like last few things I would like to say was Kai is because these are new students. Kai is very competitive, and the acceptance rate is this year it was more than it was last year, which was promising, but the submissions were also equally the number was larger. So the acceptance rate is at only at 25%, but it's always beneficial, even if you don't get into a conference, to submit your paper and get those reviews back, because the peer review process in most of the computer science conferences is quite thorough, and it's very meticulous, and the feedback you get will often most likely polish your work a lot more than it was in the initial stages. So even if you don't think you might make it in, you, and you might um, just submit your papers, because you do get quite a valuable amount of reviews from people who are reading your work for the first time. And it's really important to get that fresh set of eyes on your work, and that reviews that you get back is quite helpful, I've noticed. um, okay, that wraps up my presentation. That's me. Thank you. I'm so sorry that I took so long.
No worries. Okay, so now let me do stop recording and then actually so that it's save the time for viewers. And then